Oh, okay. Good morning. Good morning. Nice crowd. Way to go. We like that. I'm Harry Bognich. I am currently serving as the president of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, Kansas. And I welcome all of you, both members and guests. We have a very exciting program here. And as you can tell, we have lots of people to tell you all about property taxes. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda Trout because she's going to run this part of the meeting.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really glad to have you here, and we hope we've put together a program. We know that there are other things going on today, so we appreciate your being here this morning. Some of you, I think, may be actually going to some other program later, so we'll see. We have 4 representatives of government who represent us with us today, and the point of our program is to talk about the relationship between levels of government, to talk about what the local government does, what the county government does, and 2 representatives, one of state and one of Senate and one of the legislature at the state level. And we've got 4 specific issues that we're going to talk about. And I have asked them just to feel free to talk about what they do. I'm going to introduce them briefly. We're going to start with property taxes, and then we're also going to talk about education, public safety, including law enforcement, and highways and roads. And who does what, and how does one tell the other what to do, and what work have they done on those issues? It's a lot to cover, so we're going to get started. Next to me is Senator Ethan Corson, who represents District 7 at the and next to him is Commissioner Janae Hanslick, the Johnson County Commissioner representing the 2nd District. Fourth district, the 4th district. Councilperson Ian Graves, representing Ward 6 in Prairie Village, and Senator Stephanie Clayton. I have representative written down. Okay, Representative Stephanie Clayton, who represents District 19, in the Kansas legislature. Commissioner Hanslick is going to begin the program on the subject of property taxes. There are pieces of paper on your chairs for you to write questions if you have them, and pass them, hold them up, and someone will collect them, and we will ask those questions that we have time for at the end of the program. So thank you for being here, and Janae, you can begin.
Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. Well, thank you, Linda, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today. I am going to be referring to some slides that will be up on the screens, but there are also hard copies back at the entry table if you want to follow along in more detail. There's a lot of information here. I'm going to just go over it at a high level to talk about the county and property taxes. So first of all, as I hope you all know, the county government consists of a 7-member board of county commissioners. The chair, who's currently Mike Kelly, is elected at large, and then there are 6 other commissioners who are elected by district. And one of our major responsibility is setting the county's budget each year. And if we go to the next slide, something I think is really, that I have found most people don't understand, and we might get into this later in the differences between cities and county governments, is that the county government serves basically as an administrative arm of the state. There are certain administrative functions that we are required to provide, and they're on that list, like running the elections, property appraisals, keeping the land records, financing our courts and our district attorney's office. And then there are also required services that we have to provide, things like mental health, public health, solid waste management, the sheriff's office and the jails. Those are all requirements that we have to provide. And then there are services that the county provides that are determined locally, like our parks and our libraries, wastewater. And in case you didn't know, we have 2 airports and actually 1 rail system, so you may not know that. So moving on, how do we fund all those services? There are 5 major buckets of revenue sources for the county budget every year. We all know about the property taxes, and there are some folks who think that property taxes fund the entire county budget, but that's not actually true. Property taxes fund about 26% of the entire county budget. The other funds are what we call intergovernmental, which are basically state and a lot of federal grants. That's about 7%. Excuse me. Another big bucket are fees and services. A lot of those are for wastewater. Wastewater is not funded with property taxes. It's totally fee-based, but it still comes under the umbrella of the county government. And then there's sales taxes, which is about 14%, and there's miscellaneous things like interest from bonds and other kinds of rental of assets, all kinds of different things in that category. So the thing to remember from this slide is property taxes do not fund the entire county budget, only about a quarter of it. And the next slide just shows that same information in a little bit different way. I put the county property tax, parks and rec, and library in the red boxes of each of those taxing jurisdictions. And then how do we spend that money? The next slide is about the county's operating budget. And I know it looks very complicated, but if I can draw your attention to the left side of that slide, those are the various buckets of expenditures that the county spends money on. The biggest one is infrastructure, and that includes roads and bridges in the unincorporated areas. The county, parks and rec, and library, and those are the things that the Board of County Commissioners has authority over. That's about 20% of your tax bill. The biggest part of your tax bill is education and schools. Between the schools and the community college, depending on where you live, it can be 55% of your bill. I don't have any authority to change their mill levy. That's the school board. And then you can see we have the cities, cities and the state, and then sometimes there's special districts. So the main point to take from this slide is that, and please share this with people, and I actually put some handouts back there. The majority of your property tax bill does not go to the county. And I like to tell people, even if we would have no property taxes for county parks and libraries, you'd still have about 80% of your bill to pay. But what you wouldn't have are ambulances, 911, jails, home-delivered meals for seniors. All of that would go away. So the next slide, I think, is another interesting one, just very quickly. This shows the changes in assessed value over the past 10 years. And I really think this slide's important because what it basically is saying is that on average, Johnson County homes, the appraised value goes up about 6 to 7% on average each year. Now, after the Great Recession, you can see it really dipped. Housing prices went down, but then they came back up. And then in 23 and 24, we all remember that, they went way up, higher than they've ever been. But now they have come back down to that 6 to 7% average. And the appraiser's office has told us that they expect that to stay pretty steady going forward. I mean, of course, we don't know what the economy might do, but I think this gives you a good sense of why things go up and down or how they go up and down when you get your property appraisal. The next slide just shows how the county has tried to counteract some of those variations in the property, the assessed values. We have reduced the mill levy, I believe it's 7 out of the 8 past years. Now I know that doesn't necessarily mean your property tax bill goes down, but it certainly helps balance out some of those spikes in the value of your home. The next slide, I think, is one of the most important ones, and what it does is it shows that over time, the percentage of property taxes, residential property taxes that fund the county's budget has increased, not quite double, but almost double. You can see back in 1988, it was less than half of the budget, and in 2023, it was 70%. So when people ask, why have taxes gone up? A big part of it is because the county has lost other revenue sources and has had to rely more and more on residential property taxes. We don't like it any more than you do, but we only have a few tools in our toolbox. And so that gets me to the next slide. And I know that's a lot of information, but basically what this slide is saying is the state legislature, present company accepted, has continued to take away tools so that the county can diversify our revenue sources instead of continuing to rely on residential property taxes. Things like the local ad valorem tax relief, which has now been repealed. That chart just shows you how much money would have been brought in if the state legislature had honored their promise to return that money to the counties and to the cities. There was a city-county revenue sharing. The mortgage registration fee went away, which was a source of funds for the county. And then the machinery and equipment exemption. And even right now, I'm sure Senator Corson can speak more to this, there's a bill that, I'm not sure if did it pass, that would remove certain things that are currently on personal property taxes, like airplanes. Someone who owns an airplane won't have to pay personal property tax on it, but guess who then has to pick up that cost?
No.
It hasn't passed.
Hasn't passed.
You don't think it'll get through?
I don't think it will.
Oh, good. But that isn't fair, is it? That you have to pick up that so someone who is wealthy enough to own an airplane doesn't have to pay taxes on it. So you can see, and then of course the refusal to expand Medicaid. Each year the county does about $20 million in charitable care for mental health and public health that we don't get any reimbursement for that. And then 2 more slides. The next one is so what are we concerned about right now? I mean, everyone who has to live off of a budget, we're looking at what's going to happen at the state level in terms of the property tax cap. I know that failed. And then there's been a lot of conversation this legislative session about how to kind of force counties to be revenue neutral or only expand their budget by a certain amount. And I'll let Senator Corson talk more about that. I mentioned the personal property tax base, and then of course at the federal level. The county has about $80 million right now in active or pending disbursements for federal money. we don't know what's going to happen with some of that. And then this seems like a minor thing, but the feds are threatening to remove the tax exemption on municipal bonds, which would cost all of us millions of dollars. So finally, there's just the last slide is just some questions for you to think about after hearing that previous presentation. Do you think that is it fair the way the tax base is set up for county residents? What could we do to help bring down property taxes given all the situations that I mentioned? And who should control local property taxes? There are a lot of folks at the state level who really want to control it and make us the bad guys. Or should we let the local governments do that? So thank you for listening to that. I hope that that's
Okay.
helpful.
Let's just go on and talk about the state and property. Let's talk about that issue first from the state, Stephanie and Ethan, and then also what the local government has to do with taxation.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Okay, can you guys hear me with this mic? Okay, that's good, because I'm whispering right now, so I always have to kind of control my voice and keep it so I'm not making you guys jump out of your seats. All right, so I'm Representative Stephanie Sawyer Clayton. This is my 13th legislative session, and so I have seen a lot of things come and go when it comes to tax issues, especially at the state level. I think when I first took office, the mortgage registration tax, we were just losing that. Same thing with machinery and equipment, or as we call M&E. And so those, M&E in particular has hit other counties much harder than it has hit Johnson County, but this is sort of a death by 1,000 cuts. Commissioner Hanslick mentioned, oh, and I might also want to mention that this is my 7th year on the tax committee. So, and one of the funny things too that I hear from a lot of people when I say, oh, I'm on the tax committee, it is the most important committee that I'm on, it's my favorite committee, and then I always get, well, you must be real good with numbers, and it's like, actually, no, I'm not. What I am good with, though, is understanding various nuances and the way that when you do something at one level, it affects people at another level, but understanding this more importantly than anything else. Yes, tax is about numbers, but it is also about emotion. It is about equality between different groups of people, because who is paying the tax? Who is funding government? Who's doing that, right? Which taxpayers, which tax-paying entities? And it is also about perception, because oftentimes people might perceive that they're being taxed out of their homes or what have you, when in reality, they are paying the heaviest burden, whereas other individuals or entities are not. So, unlike anyone else up here, I am up for re-election every 2 years. And so if you live in my legislative district, you see me at your door all the time. You know, it's like I'm probably standing right behind you right now. Like, I always try to show up. And that is the way that it should be, right? Because when you are, one of the reasons the House was designed to be the body that was closest to the people, because we are always running for election, so we are always very accountable. And so as such, when I go to doors, usually what I hear people care about the most is education, in particular education funding. People that I have the pleasure to represent are not fans of vouchers, even if they themselves send their children to private schools. They do not like the chipping away of education funding, and they want stability overall. I remember a time when I was knocking doors when I had constituents tell me, for the love, will you please raise my taxes, because the tax plan of a previous governor, whose name I don't like to say out loud, caused major turmoil. But in any case, so when I hear these very emotional situations, and you know, I'm asking for it, I'm showing up at your front porch, so I am there for you to unload on me. That's what I want. That's what I want to hear from all of you at the end of this today, is I want to hear what you're thinking and feeling and worried about. But this last election, the number one thing that I heard about in my legislative district and in areas where I volunteered, and that counts Wichita, Manhattan, Leavenworth, other parts of Johnson County, and that was, my property taxes are too high. So when I hear that, I listen and I look for solutions. Now, one of the problems is, of course, we're nearly finished with the legislative session, and Senator Corson is also, he does the really hard, awful work. He is our ranking minority member on Senate tax, so he has to go in there and really fight for it. Our ranking minority member on House tax is a wonderful man named Tom Sawyer who serves in Wichita, and I trust him implicitly. Now, this is no offense to Ethan because he does an amazing job, but the Senate tax chair and the House tax chair, I tend to have a little bit of a disagreement when it comes to, is that a diplomatic way of putting it? So I think, it's one of them hates the other. I think the other one is too chill to really care. So on the House side, we have had a number of good compromise plans come through. So you might have seen that both the House and the Senate defeated a hard cap on valuations. And so I believe that that was 3%, right, was the bill. I know it's been
I think it
between
ended
3
up
and
being
4.
4 at the
4
last vote, but it's been 3 times and 4 times.
But so on the surface, that looks really good, right? Like, yeah, my valuations have been jumping significantly. I live in sort of northern Overland Park, and part of the reason why a lot of our valuations, if you live in Old Leawood, I know I've been hearing from you, because they have been jumping significantly in that area, but a lot of that is due to the free market. So supply and demand, everyone wants to live near us because we're amazing, right? Yeah. But also because we have amazing schools, we have wonderful local services, we have beautiful parks. I know I use Meadowbrook Park in Prairie Village quite a bit, and it's an excellent asset.
A county
yes.
park.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is located in Prairie Village, though. But it is a team effort, as are so many of the wonderful things that we do. But in any case, so that cap on valuations, at first that looks good, right? Because you get major sticker shock, you're looking at your budget, you're trying to figure out, all right, people like me who will probably never have their mortgage paid off, we get it rolled into our escrow. But I have a number of people that I serve that already have their houses paid off, and then in December of all times, then it's like, that will be $3,000, and it's hard to come up with that money. And so, bottom line, when I make decisions at the state level, I am coming at it from a point of listening and compassion, because that's what I'm thinking about when I go up there. But then I run into a buzzsaw of a distinct lack of logic and a misunderstanding of the way that things work. In particular, when I'm working with people who are in power who do not have constituents who want all of the extra services and quality of life that Johnson County has come to provide. That's why we live here, but also it's not free. So we've looked at a couple of solutions. Our tax chair, who could not be further away from us geographically, he actually lives in the part of Kansas that is in the mountain time zone. That's how far away he is, but and although he and I disagree on some fundamental social issues, he is a very good man to work with when it comes to tax issues. So he came up with a 6-year rolling average of those valuation percentages. So instead of these major spikes, like my valuations jumped 34% last year, and yikes, that we've had to change the budget a little bit, but I've had to get a second job, but that's fine. I like my house, and I like staying there, and I like the services that I get. But not everyone has that flexibility and the ability to just run out and get extra work. Ergo, my compassion and my desire to solve these problems. Now, one tax conference committee that is still pending that I thought was dead, but I texted the speaker yesterday and I asked him, hey, are we doing anything else? And he said, I think, Ethan, the bill number is like, it's a House bill. It has the 20 mills for education. So the state does tax you all for education, for that state property tax. That's the main thing that we control. But there are also other entities and certain parties and powers that be that want us to put various controls. So there's the hard cap on valuations, which would completely decimate the work that Janae and Ian do. It would make it nearly impossible for them to make much in the way of changes. And while it would help some people who already have homes, it would really benefit people like me to just, I'll stay in my house forever, my valuations will never change. It makes it nearly impossible for young families to purchase homes. So if you do your research, look at California Proposition 2, and you'll sort of see what the property tax issues have done to that state. So Ethan and I both happily opposed that. So if you get anything that says that we, wanted to make it so that your property taxes went up, that's actually what we did. We made a sensible choice. But there is still a conference committee report that has a restoration of the local ad valorem tax fund, which is something that the state hasn't funded for years. This is called the Astra Fund, but there is no way that we could have gotten something through that would have just magically restored that money without having some controls in place. The initial plan had a protest petition that a lot of folks in smaller cities had an issue with, and so instead, as it sits now, wrapped in this conference committee report, we have that restoration of that local funding, but it would have, I believe, if the mills, I believe, exceeded a certain amount, or if taxes exceeded a certain amount, it would trigger an election. So it's sort of a, it's one of those things where it's like, we're not gonna be able to get away with, given our makeup at the state level.
And an election the county would have to pay for.
Uh-huh. It would, so I guess we can just not have the Astra Fund and not have any of that local money.
Ian, do you want to talk about what property taxes or taxation at the local level?
But I mean, yeah, and it's okay if you guys don't want that, so, but we live in reality in Topeka.
So, yeah, I think from a taxation standpoint, cities live sort of where the rubber meets the road. We are where the abstractions that form where your tax dollars come from and how they get to government sort of ends. I'll kind of lay out some examples. So in Prairie Village, we have a similar kind of budget breakdown that the county does. Folks around PV talk a lot about how we pay a lot in property taxes because our property values are high. Of our budget, I believe about 29% of it is property tax revenues. And then beyond that, we generate revenues from sales taxes and then fees. Fees are actually a huge source of revenue for local governments, renting things, renting parks, pools, pool passes, all this sort of thing. But the way your cities get funded are a direct reflection of how your cities are built. And in Prairie Village, and in probably most of Northeast Joco that borders Missouri, a lot of that money is going to be coming from what are essentially bedroom communities with some amount of commercial real estate. On top of that, those cities are quite a bit denser. So that all plays into how we pay for things, right? We're going to be pulling from homes and a small degree of shops. And for a long time, that is essentially what funded those local governments. In the last, how long ago did we fully enable internet sales tax? Do you know?
It would have been a
It
few.
was, since I was in the Senate, so it
Okay.
would have been like 21, 22.
So that's
4 or 5
created,
years.
it's created a whole new dimension of revenue for cities, actually. As retail, as sort of retail like you'd see in the Prairie Village shops in Corinth, scattered around Northeast, has sort of faded to the background or not been a main driver of revenue. A lot of that has shifted to just Amazon shopping, and the cities have been able to recoup a lot of that revenue because of sales tax revenue as well. So if you look at your city's budget breakdown and you see over probably since about 21, 22, we had a surge in both sales and use taxes. Those are sort of the same side of, or different sides of the same coin. And that's actually helped us out a lot because while shopping at our shops is down, people are shopping online, that we're still capturing a lot of that revenue. Interestingly, now that apartments are being built sort of en masse all over the county, those are actually their own commercial sales tax drivers because people who live in apartments still shop on the internet all the time. So if you have a massive apartment being built, it's not just a property tax revenue source, it's actually a sales tax revenue source.
And if I might interrupt you for a minute, I just want to make it clear, because The county gets blamed all the time. Why are you building all these apartments? We have nothing to do with that. Those are the cities.
Yes.
Yeah.
We only have only the
this-
unincorporated areas, and there are no apartments there.
The cities have a certain degree of control over what gets built. More than the county,
Yeah.
but only so much under state statute.
So who gets control over what's built?
The developers,
Yeah.
largely. This is a talk on taxation and not zoning.
Yes.
Zoning is more my wheelhouse, but as people might know, one of the big reasons, but I'll just dovetail on that a little bit. One of the big reasons I am so hung up on zoning updates, density, infill, is because the reason home values are going up at such stratospheric rates is because of a housing crisis. It's not just that teardowns in mansionization in the Northeast is an issue, but the main issue is just there's not enough houses, period. Not enough apartments, not enough houses, not enough anything. That's driving up property values, which drives up property taxes. Because the same thing that impacts the housing shortage also impacts the prices of everything else. Because if people are paying more for housing, they have, they'll be driving farther away, they'll be spending more in gas, that, drives up things like road costs, drives up things like fuel costs. All of this is related to how we've built our cities. So if a city is looking to long-term become more sustainable on a property tax front and a sales tax front, they need to really look at how they do infill and how they build more densely. And that is an unpopular question for a lot of folks, but it's the medicine that cities ultimately will have to take. We've looked at it in Prairie Village. I'm sure you may have heard about it on the news or something. But we looked at it for a long time. Ultimately, the council, after an election, decided to halt discussions on single-family zoning, which is probably like 92% of Prairie Village by land area. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens. But what's going to happen is the property values are still going to increase, and we're going to be kind of stuck in this cycle. I think that I think another aspect of this too, on the city level, is just you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into the property tax questions. We've gotten so in the weeds lately. We argue whether or not to talk about the mean home value in Prairie Village or the median home value in Prairie Village because of the way homes are being rebuilt in Prairie Village. Normally, if you have a healthy housing stock, you have a normal curve of prices, right? You have a normal curve where most people are around in Prairie Village I'd say 2/3 of home values in Prairie Village are between $200,000 and $500,000. So it would look like this. But since mansionization has been occurring, it looks like this. So we are now in an interesting spot where we've struggled with who are we setting property tax policy for? Is it the people over in the sort of Neo-Mission Hills builds, or is it, no offense, or is it people in my ward where the median home value is actually $360,000? And so we have this, in Ward 6, it's $360,000. Prairie Village median is $430,000. Prairie Village mean is $560,000. So these are like highly divergent numbers. And so the struggle to set policy in an equitable way in cities is very challenging, especially if you're trying to maintain any semblance of affordability while keeping like nice streets, which is what we like in Prairie Village. We like plowing our roads. We get them plowed. And
Yay.
I mean, you won't be getting complaints from us, probably because it's not your district. But and we like to keep our nice roads, and folks really like that stuff. Another thing I might add too is when folks want to talk about cutting spending at our levels, I want to say 75% of our budgets is police and roads and parks. And if you add in things like admin at City Hall, you're getting up into the 80s, and we're now just tinkering with the margins. And people think that we're just like putting all this money into DEI, or we're putting all this money into like, sort of pet projects. No, it's just drainage. It's just drainage, it's the cops, it's the roads. That's basically all it is, and that stuff has gotten a lot more expensive. If you look at things like the national highway, the cost of building highways as a proxy for roads, it just keeps going up. Labor going up because housing is also going up. All of that goes up together. And so that's kind of the bind we find ourselves in. And cities really, our most maneuverable avenue is property taxes, despite it being a minority of, or a sort of a small piece of our total revenue. Cities are a lot more constrained on sales taxes because increasing sales taxes or even maintaining sales taxes like Lenexa just did requires a continuing, the sales taxes expire, you have to renew them, statutorily you have to have a vote on it. So if we wanted to suddenly raise our sales taxes, we'd have to put that to a vote, we'd have to justify it, that's hard. Now if we want to let our property values float up and just capture that increased revenue, that's easy. And we've been trained to do that by years of Brownback and, sorry, it's like saying Voldemort around here. Yeah. That's kind of why it happens. And then I think on top of that, what makes things even more complicated is there is a statutory maximum sales tax for a given taxing district. It can't get higher than like 10%.
I think that's right.
But the problem is the state is capturing like 6% at the outset. So the state's taking a big piece of local commerce to fund itself, and cities and counties and local entities have a little bit of leeway left to maneuver in terms of levying sales taxes in that space.
Ethan, I think you've been called out. Let's hear about.
I got your back, Ethan.
I'll just kind of share with you a couple like 30,000-foot observations about kind of how I think about property taxes as a state legislator. The first, I had this really interesting conversation with a journalist who has done reporting in a lot of different states and now is a political reporter in Kansas. And his observation to me, which kind of stuck and I think is really true, is that he said, I'm just not really envious of policymakers in Kansas, especially in Northeast Kansas, because people both want a low tax environment, but they also have a really high expectation of services. And he said it's just different than other areas that I've done reporting in where there is just a more modest expectation of what kind of services that the county and city and state should be providing in terms of roads and bridges and parks and schools and things like that. I mean, there's just, he said in Northeast Kansas, people really want both those low taxes and that high degree of services that they've come to, reflects kind of the high quality of life that we all enjoy here. So it's a difficult policy-making environment from that perspective. The second big picture observation I would offer is, Representative Sawyer-Clayton and I we would text each other last year when we were both campaigning and knocking on doors, and we would say, "Whoa, I was out knocking doors in this precinct, and whoa, those people are upset about property taxes." I mean, it was issues 1, 2, and 3 for me when I was out at people's door. It was all people wanted to talk about, and so I think my job as a state legislator is to try to be responsive to that, right? I mean, I view myself as I'm not coming to Topeka with a bunch of my own ideas and opinions and things like that. I'm really trying to reflect what my constituents have communicated to me are their priorities, right? This isn't Ethan's agenda. This is the people of Senate District 7 who've communicated to me by me being at thousands of doors what they would like me to focus on. Property taxes was a huge, huge one of those. So I don't think we can just say, well, inflation is really high and these expenses are going up, and so we can't do anything about it. I think we need to try to be creative and think about ways to address it. At the same time, the third observation I'll make and close on is I have a really healthy respect for local control. And I think that Commissioner Hanslick was elected by her voters to do a certain job. And I think Councilmember Graves was elected by his voters to do a certain job. And I think that my role is to do the job I was elected to do and to let them do the jobs that they were elected to do. And so I always want to be cautious with the role that the state is playing in telling cities and counties how they ought to be operating, what they should do, what draconian procedures they need to be following. I mean, I always view it as the best solution to this is we have regular elections. And if people feel like they would be happy with fewer services and less taxes, they can vote in a way that reflects that at the local level, at the county level, at the city level. And that is really the best way for those decisions to get made. It's really not for the state to step in and for me to try to tell Commissioner Hanslick or Councilmember Graves, here's what I think as a state legislator you ought to be doing as a county commissioner or as a city council member. So that's kind of my 30,000-foot view of kind of how I look at this issue. But again, it is a challenging issue because there is a demand for high quality services and a demand for a low tax environment. And it's difficult for all of us, no matter what level you're at, to meet both of those objectives in a way that makes everybody happy.
That's very interesting. In this talk, some of you here and there have talked about roads, have talked about law enforcement, have talked about education. So I'd like to try to address those issues a little bit more directly, both in terms of what the state does, what the county does, what the city does with those issues, and how it relates to taxes, are the responsibilities other than funding that have to do with that. And so let's start with education. If you would each just talk a little bit about what your level of government does and how you might relate to, how the county might relate to the sheriff, to the policeman in Prairie Village or whatever. How does that work? First, let's start with education.
Who?
Well, who wants to start?
I'll start. Really, the county, our role in terms of education is to make sure that the county remains an attractive place for people to come so that our schools can continue to be funded at an adequate level and that we continue to create an environment that allows us to have great schools. The county, we don't have any direct authority over schools, but we certainly work to make that environment in our county a great place, and we support our schools and collaborate with them in many ways with mental health and public health, but in terms of funding, we don't have any authority in that area.
Sure. So cities materially have not a whole lot of crossover with the schools. I think you'll see most of our interaction with the district is based on things like resource sharing with SROs, managing traffic impacts at schools. I will say, like Commissioner Hanslick just said, cities have a very vested interest in keeping the schools strong. A lot of folks will say that their city is a great place to live because it is like this magical, unique place, and that's a very nice thing to think. But the reality is your city is desirable for basically a couple reasons, and this includes Prairie Village especially. It's how good are the schools, how good are the services, and in our case, we're pretty close to downtown. So we're about as close as you can get downtown while still having really good schools. And that's why people want to live there, want to live in Prairie Village. We have people just jumping over state line out of Waldo and Brookside when their kids become school age to live in a district that takes good care of their kids, that's able to. So we have a very strong interest in working with the schools, but also just keeping up our end of the bargain community-wise, making sure the schools are supported and that folks, and they stay strong. So we tend to be in a minor support role and in a big advocacy role for schools, but we don't control the schools either. They are coexisting forms of local government that we exist with.
So, Stephanie.
Well, I would say, I feel kind of bad talking about this without having anyone from the State Board of Education or from the Shawnee Mission School Board. We have excellent partners there. They do amazing work. But for our part at the state level, we have the power of the purse. We make sure that schools get funded. Well, sometimes we do. And speaking to some of what we deal with, at the state level, one of the big differences between what Senator Corson and I deal with and what Commissioner Hanslick and Councilmember Graves deal with is that we work in a partisan environment. So Senator Corson and I are Democrats. We are in this super minority. There is a super majority of Republicans. When we run for office, we are not running on the mechanics of money and curbs and gutters and closest to home. We're running on a lot of those, whether we like it or not, those bigger, more national ideas, although we are at the state government level. So school funding right now, we are bound by the Constitution to make sure that kids get a suitable education. If you look up Article 6 in the Constitution, it's right there. We are constitutionally bound to do that. It is interpreted whether we are actually reaching that duty, that constitutional duty, by our Supreme Court. Please remember to vote no against the changes to Supreme Court on August 4th, 2026. That's not going to help us when it comes to school funding. But in any case, so we are there to sort of hold the line when it comes to that type of funding, and to a certain degree, we set policy. Although, frankly, if I had my preferences, the state legislature would have nothing to do with education policy and strictly stick to staying in our lane, which is the funding and dissemination of those funds. But for the most part, that is our role, is that. Senator, I know you can add on to
Yeah,
this.
I think that's absolutely right. I think Representative Sawyer-Clayton is absolutely right. I mean, our job is really a modest one at the state legislative level if we're doing it right. I mean, our job is really to make sure that schools are being funded appropriately. But we have, as part of the Constitution, we have, and kind of what I closed on my previous comments, we have a state board of education. And those folks are elected, 10 of them. They're elected, they have their own voters. They campaign just like I did. And those folks are the folks who really at a statewide level when it comes to graduation requirements and things of that nature. Those are the folks who really have the expertise in the Department of Education to really make the best decisions with respect to that. And then, of course, we also at the local level, we have our locally elected school boards, and those folks are elected as members of the community who make up the community, reflect the community's values, and they're able to, at a local level, make decisions that impact those school districts. And one of the things that I think is maybe not unique to Kansas, but is certainly true about Kansas is we have very different communities across the state. And that's why I think it's important to allow for that local control, for those local school boards to really make the bulk of the decisions, because what works well in a school in Goodland, that may work perfectly fine there. There may be a policy there that works great, that's responsive to the needs of that community, and that may make no sense for Shawnee Mission, and vice versa. And so I think that those locally elected school boards having the prerogative to represent the unique needs of their particular communities is really important.
What about law enforcement, public safety and law enforcement? Excuse me. Who would you talk about the various levels of that?
Why don't you go ahead? I'll let you go.
You guys do a lot more than we do
Yeah.
when it comes
So
to that.
cities are where you get most of your law enforcement services from. You will pay directly to funding your police department through all of the various tax avenues that go into your city. At Prairie Village, our police department is our biggest employer, like inside of the city, like the department that employs the most people, full-time employees, is the police department. Incidentally, it also is the biggest cost of labor in a city of our size. That may vary a little bit. If your city's very large, like in Overland Park, you'll probably see that level out between public works and things. In Prairie Village, it's the police. We like to keep tight control over our department. We don't like sharing it with the state or the county. I think there was a bill this year that was really looking to force departments into essentially conscripting a few of their officers into ICE through a number of contracts. I know.
Was that 187?
It was one Kobach really wanted.
Yeah, I spoke with your chief on it.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Bad bill.
Oh my God.
It's not going anywhere though.
Good. But that bill, if you see police departments coming out advocating against it, you know it's particularly not great. And it wasn't, because police departments in cities serve the residents of those cities. And in the case of this bill, I have very little interest in checking everyone's papers when they're driving around to see if they're a resident or a citizen of the United States. It's not my business. It's not the business we should be in. We're in the business of public safety in Prairie Village. And so that's kind of our view on things, or my view at least. Can't speak for everyone on our huge city council. But
It's a pretty big one.
it's 12, yeah. But you know, it's something that, you know, we're tasked with. If there's a crime wave in a place, it's the city's problem to take care of. Unincorporated JOCO excluded. But you know, our police department works a lot with the residents to help people stay secure their belongings, mind their street, all this stuff. And so it's pretty much the purview of the cities. Without, you know, there is some overlap with the sheriff's department. Prairie Village is in a fun spot because the current sheriff is our former police chief, so we've got like a knife in there. But it's a whole new world now that we have a sheriff that's a lot more willing to work with the departments and not talk down to them like the previous one did. So that's nice. I know we had a number of strange issues in Prairie Village where I believe the previous sheriff did something like said we had like a potential human trafficking case in Prairie Village and like did some investigation, but like never told the police in Prairie Village that they were investigating, probably because it may not have actually been a real thing. So it is important to work with the county, and Johnson County and most of Kansas, we still elect our sheriffs, which for better or for worse, that's a thing. So sheriff's departments are politicized in that way. Police departments are not. They report to your mayor and your governing body, and I think that is the best way to manage a professional department. And so the cities are where you should go if you've got a law enforcement issue. That's your first stop and probably your last stop.
I'm going to just say one of the questions we received relates to this, so I'm going to read it. You've kind of answered it, but if anybody else wants to speak to it. The question is, how are the counties and/or the state of Kansas law enforcement staff interacting with federal immigration and customs enforcement going forward? I'd like to hear the state. I mean, Ian, you kind of talked about it a little bit, but what is the state and who decides what's going on with either Stephanie or Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the Kansas Highway Patrol is really the main law enforcement that interacts with the state, is the highway patrol that you'll see out on the interstate and turnpikes. To my knowledge, they're not doing anything differently or new related to immigration enforcement with the change of administration. So I think they're, continuing to, enforce the policies in the same way that they always have. That's my most current knowledge of it. I'm on the Senate Transportation Committee, so we hear from them pretty regularly. And to my knowledge, they're just sort of continuing with their mission of ensuring public safety in a way that I've always had really good interactions with them, and it's been really positive.
Aside from just pushes for resolutions, which are usually just a strongly worded letter to the governor. So I'm on the Federal and State Affairs Committee that tends to handle a lot of those more controversial issues. And so there has been a resolution that was passed that, was urging the governor to comply with ICE and so on and so forth. It's, again, doesn't have a lot of teeth in it. There was a particularly onerous bill, SB 187, but that is, unless it's miraculously brought up in our veto session, which I highly doubt, that one is pretty well dead. So there is definitely that push for the federal ideas coming down at the state level. And, although a lot of the stuff that is done at the state level likely is not appreciated at the local level, we are holding back a lot of some of the worst stuff from coming down and adversely affecting people. And in particular, Senator Corson is to be commended for his work doing that. No, I've seen it. Like, it's real. He's working very hard.
Well, I would follow up with what Councilmember Graves said that at the county, every year we do an annual community satisfaction survey. We just got the results for 2025. And like every year, the number one issue that residents love about Johnson County is that it's a safe place. Public safety is always right up at the top. Generally after parks and libraries, they love public safety. But that is another reason why people want to live here. They want to feel safe. And those of you may not know, I used to be the director at Safe Home Domestic Violence Agency, so I got to work with the chiefs of police throughout the whole county and have an incredible respect for the work they do, because I've seen a little bit different side of it, I think, than most people. And there was always been this frustration of this butting of heads with the sheriff's department. And even before I was in this role, I always said, we need a sheriff who has been in local law enforcement so that we will all be safer if there is collaboration between the sheriff's office and local law enforcement. And I'm thrilled that we now have that situation. The sheriff's, despite what our previous sheriff would like to tell everybody, that it was him who keeps the whole county safe. He never liked it when I would push back on that with statistics. But the sheriff's primary jobs are running the jails. We have 2 facilities in Johnson County, taking out warrants, delivering warrants, which does mean sometimes they have to go into the cities. And then they also patrol the unincorporated areas. They also are paid by some of the smaller cities to serve as their law enforcement too. But really their only role with the cities should be to come in when the city requests their help on certain cases. And there's been a lot of blurring of those lines over the past several years. And I was recently talking to Sheriff Roberson, and I know that he has no intention of turning his department, or even part of his department, into immigration enforcement. And I can't say that would have happened, that would have been the case a year ago. So I think we're in good hands, and I look forward to even more public safety because of that collaboration.
And then the collaboration with the state is the Highway Patrol, is that right?
Yeah, the Highway Patrol, but again, that's sort of a limited role.
Very limited.
Of really our highway interstate system.
Okay. I have another question. I have a question I'm going to ask, and then we'll go back into other issues if we have time. This question says, being a young person paying for my own college, the rising rates make it seem I will never be able to afford a home. What is the government doing to make it more affordable for young people? So.
They're not. I want to be very honest and very clear when it comes to this, is that one of the biggest issues with the rising costs of school, at least publicly funded state higher education, is we've seen massive rounds of budget cuts. I remember I think seeing like 9 rounds in a row, and so this I'm lucky being a Gen Xer, and in the fact that my generation is really one of the last ones that had even halfway decent school funding. When I went to school at Emporia State University, and I was first in my family to go, my tuition was $817 a semester. for you could take up to 21 hours. And I usually did, because then you got to get out of there fast, right? Because that was still expensive. Now it's astronomical. And that's one of the worst things that we're doing is we are not funding our higher education institutions the way that we did for boomers in particular and Gen Xers. So now we've pulled the rug out from under people. We have a generation that is drowning in debt. And with the natural supply and demand of housing, like, okay, yes, I can't really control the free market, right? Or, I mean, I could, but I don't think my constituents would be very pleased with that. Some of those mansionized areas, those are my constituents. They want to live in big houses, right on. I will support that. But one of the problems is that when we are not funding schools at the state level, like, that's on us. That is why it costs as much as it does, at least in my opinion. So it's, I will vote for more higher education funding all day, every day. But unfortunately, I am one of 125 House members. There is a disturbing trend that goes against funding higher education. And I think a lot of it goes with this whole anti-intellectualism and education being for the sake of the workforce. How many times have you guys ever heard someone say, college isn't for everyone? And I'm like, oh, cool. Does that include your kids? No.
Yeah.
When they say college isn't for everyone, they talk about an increase in people going into the trades, which I'm a strong union supporter. I think we should have more people doing that, but they never mean their kids. They mean someone else's kids. And I think that everyone deserves to have what we would call a classical education. And yet here we are with those overarching attitudes that sort of divide college up and say, oh no, we need to educate a workforce. Well, yes, I want people to have skills. I do not want them to be folks who are not taught to really question authority. That's where the danger lies, and that is where the trend in funding tends to go. So continue to push back against that, because we should be making sure you get your higher ed funded.
I agree. I think something that is frightening is when you work with people that have no critical thinking skills. And we need that now more than
I wouldn't
ever.
know what that's like.
Seriously, like.
But I did want to address the housing portion of that question. I am very proud of our current Board of County Commissioners. We are doing more than any other board of county commissioners has ever done to try to address the issue of housing. However, what that has meant is there are some folks that think the county has all of the tools and resources to solve it all, which we don't. But I'm really proud. We are doing. We're continuing to look at ways. What is the county's role? What can the county do? But a big part of the frustration of housing is that the federal government used to do so much more. Better or worse, I mean, they did some things that aren't so good, but they've pulled out of that and really left it to state and local government to deal with the housing crisis. And I'm very concerned because with the Republican administration, I've been trying to follow very closely what is going to happen at HUD. They've already laid off a whole bunch of people who help oversee the funding for affordable housing programs. My heart breaks because I talk to a lot of young people who like I just met with a young woman not long ago, 25 years old. She does have a college degree. She's an engineer, and she said, I just feel hopeless. She said, I'll probably never be able to buy a house. I just don't know if I'll be able to raise a family. And I think back when I was 25, a long, long time ago, I was excited. Life was just beginning, and it's so frustrating to me. So housing is a huge issue for me personally, because I think everybody should have the opportunity to live in safe, affordable housing, to own a home if they want to. Not everybody wants to. but again, I'm very proud of the county because I think we're doing everything we can to address that issue of housing within our capabilities.
The last question that's been turned in has to do with housing, so it's still on the same subject. With increasing high-density housing to solve housing crisis, how does high-density housing help or hinder leveling out property taxes? Who pays? The developers or the people who have apartments? Ian.
Sure. Yeah, so the answer is a lot of different people pay. If you want to liken this, you'll get some people who say government should be run like a business. And usually that means that we are going to just be cutting things because people think all businesses do is just cut things. But in reality, if you want to run a local government like a business, you have to look at what your product is. And in the case of the cities, it's just land use is what is our product. We want you to come use our land, and we will charge you taxes for it. And what we've determined, what we're seeing when we pivot to high density housing is that, okay, we need a broader customer base. We need to spread the cost of living, the cost of services across a broader group of people. This is akin to something like issuing new shares of stock if you're a large corporation, let's say. We need to spread that cost further across different people, broadening the base, as folks in Republicans back in Paul Ryan's day would talk about broadening the base. This is broadening the base. So if we were increasing, say, high density apartments, for example, and the question is who pays for that? The developer will pay property taxes. Who mostly pays property taxes are going to be the tenants of an apartment. That property taxes are just passed through to tenants. They're not going to be, everybody's in this business to make money. So if something is a cost to a landlord, they're going to pass that on to their tenants somehow. Maybe not completely 100% every year, but it does get ultimately paid from rents.
I will say this, that it used to be, actually from 1978 until 2013, there used to be the homestead property tax exemption. If you're a homeowner, you didn't have it for a while because it was taken away under the previous governor's ill-fated tax plan and was added back in by an awesome group of legislators in 2017. Sorry. But the problem is that one thing that remained on the cutting room floor was the homestead exemption for renters. And so this is a bill that I have been proud to sponsor, or now lately I've just been like, can we just get it in there? I don't need my name on it. I just want it to happen. Like, I don't care. I'm not here for the credit. I'm here for the savings for our constituents. But sadly, that's still on the cutting room floor. I'm still trying to, to get it back in any way, shape, or form. Oftentimes when we do have a hearing, the pushback that we get is, well, this would be hard for the landlords. I'm sure they'll cut rent. And it's like, they're not going to cut rent. I wish that they would. I live in reality. And in reality, unless the state is providing that type of relief and looking after renters, it's not coming. It comes down to us.
If I could just add to something Ian has said, the other thing about density is that the more people that live in a more compact area, the less infrastructure we need. If the more sprawl there is, that's more roads, more sewers, and that costs all of us. So density is you hear about these things, we're being forced into 15-minute cities. No, nobody's forcing anybody. But people are recognizing they want to live in an area where there are more people, where there are more things to do, where the services are of high quality. And to do that, it's very helpful to not be all spread out because that costs more and more money the more you're spread out. And that's a whole nother topic is transit. If people live in denser areas, then there's more cost effectiveness of bus service in that area.
If I could just real quick jump back to the previous question, which overlaps with this question. Cities are where the housing problem is. It is the fault of the cities that we are not building enough housing because, no disrespect to people who like to build bigger houses, it's not that people are building bigger houses, it's that that's the only thing that can be built in our cities right now. It is the only thing that can be built in Prairie Village. If you knock down a house, you can't replace it with 2 houses, you can't replace it with an apartment, you can only replace it with a house. And the economics of doing that demands that it be a huge house because you need to get more equity back when you buy something and put a loan into it to build it up. It's not just that they're big for bigness sake, it's the economy demands this. So until cities get more realistic with their zoning policy, and apartments are one thing, but expanding zoning districts where ownership under fee, like condos, are more common, where you can own a multi-unit piece of housing, this will never be solved. I am like, federal, state funding, that's helpful. It's not going to solve the fact that we are not opening up land for housing to be built. And that is a city's problem. It may eventually become a state problem. The state may have to take a step into this lane and solve it for cities, which is not what I like. Because
They're trying to pull it back with the
I
affordable
do
housing
not, I
trust
want
fund.
no part of that, absolutely not.
States
That's on you guys.
already have a hand, the state already has a hand in zoning law. And if the majority is how it is, if they get involved, it'll be terrible, whatever they do. But I mean, we'll be building like factories in single family zoning or something. But what the point being is that cities need to wrestle with this, and it is politically very hard to wrestle with this, and that is why housing is not being built. It's not simply a money problem, it's a legal problem. It is not legal to build more housing where housing should be built. And for that reason alone, young people will not be able to afford to own housing. They will barely be able to afford to rent housing. Another thing, real quick, and I'll stop off the soapbox, is folks talk about corporate landlords, corporate this and that, coming in and buying up. That's actually really not the case in Johnson County. It's just landlords, generally speaking. And I'm not saying that people can't make a buck, but you know, I think 25% of all single-family homes in Prairie Village are rented by someone, and those are not large corporate landlords. Those are just people who own other houses that rent them. And so that also, sadly enough, gets in the way of home ownership. If people own 2 or 3 houses and rent out 2 of them, that's housing that can't be owned by its inhabitants. So this is a big problem, and it's a problem largely at the city level, where we just need to build, and we just don't want to. And that's what's inhibiting everything.
Although Overland Park's doing a pretty
They're
good
doing,
job.
they learned what not to do from us. Which is talk about it a lot. Just get your step, well, here's another little tidbit. Small cities are gonna struggle with this more because we don't have the staff to work zoning code reforms at the staff layer. We have to do a lot at the dais. And the more we do at the dais, first of all, the worse it's going to get because a lot of us don't know what we're talking about. But second of all, that just creates what happened in Prairie Village with this kind of reform is there was just a lot of, we don't know, we're working on it. And that gets really scary if you own a home and you're like, what could be built next to me under the new guidelines? And it's like, we're working on it.
Oh yeah, people in my district are
Yeah.
very frightened and very upset
And they
about
also
that.
have HOAs that would prevent anything from being built, like over in that part of town. And my part of town is where we have no HOAs. It's like the Wild West, except we're on the east side. So, like, but the problem was that when cities wrestle with this, and there's a lot of discussion, if your staff can't work fast enough, if you don't have the staff to work it fast enough, there's a vacuum of information that gets filled inevitably by people who have an axe to grind. And they're in every city. And in small cities, you don't need that many people with an axe to grind to really just throw everything off the rails. So that's what we also struggle with politically in smaller cities.
I have learned so much today. I am just thrilled. I didn't know what I was going to learn, and I've learned about taxes, and I've learned about zoning, and I've learned about the law enforcement, and it's been a great program. I hope you'll help me thank all of our panelists this morning.